So, hi again, Trish and Boone. Um, we all hear all the time about smartwatches and Fitbits and Garmin watches and all sorts of ways of measuring our daily parameters of our body. And what I just wanted to ask you both was, is it useful? And how can we make the most, if we do have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or anything that measures things like our heart rate or our step count, how can we use them to optimize our health? And what are the parameters that are of most value?
Thanks. I mean, it's a very interesting question, Mel. I'm just going to answer by sharing what's on my Fitbit screen. So I haven't used it for some time, but one of the most helpful things it tells us, in my opinion, is a sleep score. So this is my sleep index. You can say on this day, on the 21st of February, I slept for just over 7 hours, and I achieved this times within the REM phase of sleep, which is 25%, and then some light sleep, deep sleep, and then some awake periods. And I think it overall gives you a sleep assessment from a composite number of uh, parameters, which says 78 on top. So that says it's a fair amount of sleep. And there are days where, for example, when you have a better night's sleep, it says 87 composite score. Now, I don't know how these scores are actually derived, but by and large, I tend to agree. The more sleep you get, and it is said that ideally the sleep number of hours should be between 7 and 9. And I do know that I need more than 7 hours, but when I have 8 hours, it feels very good.
Mm.
And so there are times in which also just with 7 hours, you can see I have a good sleep score. So this is also good with the same amount of sleep, but with perhaps more rested sleep. And so I think one of the ways you can use this kind of smart watches or smart uh, devices, it doesn't have to be a watch, it can be a ring, is to be able to track your sleep, which you otherwise don't know very much about. Obviously, there's a resting heart rate that you can track, and some devices, not this particular one I have, will give you more than your resting heart rate. It will give you heart rate recovery after exercise, but heart rate variability as well. And in general, the higher your heart rate variability, the better. So
And
we
what
don't
is the
have
heart
this
rate
here, but I'm just going
variability?
to flick on.
What
Yeah,
is
so
your heart
that's a
rate
good
variability?
that's a good question. The heart rate variability is the variability of your heart rate in many different time domains. So, for example, the simplest way to think about heart rate variability is to see what your heart rate does between day and night. And during the daytime, you expect your heart rate to be higher by 5 to 10 points than it is at night when you're sleeping. And that kind of heart rate variability is called a diurnal variability. That means the cycle is very long, 12 hours or whatever, 14 hours awake, and then 10 hours rested. But there are other forms of heart rate variability, and typically these trackers have a much more shorter duration heart rate variability. So this is one example. This is called the inner balance. It's a Bluetooth sensor that you can put on your earlobe. We've demonstrated this on a previous webinar. But what I'm going to try and show you is you can see at the bottom screen a series of blue curvy lines that appear to go in an up and down pattern. This is called a sinusoidal pattern. And this is me tracking my breath. So you can see between the times of 6 minute, 30 seconds and 7 minutes, I've taken 2.5 breaths. And
So your
that,
heart rate goes up when you breathe in and down when you breathe out. So that's tracking your heartbeat pretty much every second, every heartbeat.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. And this is a normal variation in heartbeat. That is to say, your breath has a very strong influence on your heartbeat in exactly the way you've said now. And this is healthy. This is very healthy. So the more you can vary your heart rate up and down with your breath, the more healthy it is you have in terms of your autonomic nervous state, in particular the vagal state, because the control of your heart rate via breathing is mediated through what's called high frequency vagal nerve oscillations. This is what we think is going on. And so the more you practice breathing, the more you will enhance that vagal influence on your heart. And the vagus is the opposite to the fight or flight. The fight or flight is the sympathetic nervous system. It governs all the stress response that a lot of patients who have dysautonomia struggle with, or patients who have POTS struggle with. But the opposite of that is the vagal response. And these are, the way to think about this is the meditating Zen master or the yogi who can really modulate breath and get the heart rates down. They have a very high vagal expression, as do athletes, long distance rowers, for example, or triathletes or cyclists. They have a very high expression of the vagus. And this
So
is something that one can train.
yeah, so one of the good, so I guess one of the things about a wearable device is that you can monitor your responses over time. So if you are training in an exercise, or training for a 10K race or something, you can track your heart rate and your heart rate variability to see how fit you're getting.
That's exactly right. And I think on that note, let me just show you one other thing. This is called a circular ring, and it's not launched yet, but this is a wearable ring that I've had on my hand for the last week or two. And to your point about heart rate, which is this, shown over a sleep period, you can see my heart rate dropping here when I sleep to about 60 beats per minute, with the error bars indicating the margin of error for every 2-hour window. And here they also track what's called HRV, heart rate variability. And I was a bit surprised at my data because I thought my heart rate variability would be higher, i.e. a better value when I was asleep, but this is one night's data. But the data here that you can get from just a simple wearable device, whether it's your Fitbit or a ring, potentially also a headband, is 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 something that gives us the potential for biofeedback. And biofeedback is defined as using a sensory input, either visual, auditory, or touch, to influence the um, autonomic nervous system, or to influence our bodily involuntary nervous system, because these are things that we don't normally think we have influence on, such as peristalsis, heart rate, temperature regulation, whereas we know from practices or from observing people who, um, for example, who are triathletes, that they have a very, very low resting heart rate and a high heart rate variability. And then if you go to the domain of the meditating monks, for example, when you scan their MRI, when you do a MRI scan on their brains, you'll see a particularly different activation pattern, and you can track heart rate variability on these people as well in a very unique way. So here are some of the apps that potentially are available for us to use to guide our sleep, our rest and recovery patterns, to understand what our heart rate variability is. And if you have that biofeedback ability, and not all tools have, but some do, like this one, the Inner Balance, which is made by Heart Math, you can uh, track your heart rate variability live. So on a previous webinar, we did a live demonstration of this. And by the way, you can get this from the partner link on www.stopfainting.com. And there is going to be a 10% discount code if you wanted to get the Inner Balance by the partner link.
That's great. Thank you very much, Boone. And one final quick question for Trish is how, if you are a patient with POTS or vasovagal syncope, are there ways that you can use your smartwatch to kind of help you track your heart rate and things? Is it of value?
It can be, but I think what's important, I think quite important for patients who have POTS, is for you to use the technology, not to let the technology dominate you. And I always focus on patients being aware of how they feel, and not being reliant on their Fitbit. So if somebody will say to me, but my Fitbit says that my heart rate went up to X or this, and I'll say, well, how do you feel? And very often they can't quite remember or don't tally that with a symptom, but this is what their watch has told them. And so while it is useful to see, to use it constructively, I think, to see how things go, it's the key thing is to remember to your symptoms and how you feel about things, and to be led by that rather than to be dictated to if your watch says, you know, your heart up, because especially if you don't know what you were doing at that time, or not to be led by that, but to be focused on your symptoms and management of your health that way, not to be led by the technology.
Yeah, so you don't want to be sort of diagnosing yourself with something terribly frightening if...
No, exactly. Because sometimes I'll say, you know, my heart, very often you'll see this when patients have 24-hour holters, for example, and something will stick out that they've been told that my heart rate went down to 45, and I'll say, my next question might be, was that at 3 o'clock in the morning by any chance? And they'll say, oh, well, that's not necessarily, you know, if your resting heart rate is 55 and at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're fast asleep, is that? So with all these things, it's to be able to discuss it and know what you're doing with that information. That's not necessarily a scary thing, but
and again, in keeping with all of the kind of theme of what we try to express in our webinars and in our clinics, is it's about taking control, isn't it? It's about you having control over your body and using technology as a way to do that. So thanks very much, Trish and Boone. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.